Well, hello, happy Friday. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you haven't been here before, my name is Jane and I'm a textile artist living in the heart of Scotland, and I run a business called Snapdragon Life, and every Friday I come on here and I make a little film about creativity or nature or living life a little bit differently. And today I want to talk about an artist who was working in 1930s and 40s called Tirzah Garwood. Now, the reason that I found out about Tirzah Garwood is that this kind of first 6 months of the year, in the Studio Club, which is my membership, we are looking at hand embroidery of 1930s, 40s, 50s, and we are kind of connecting back to the women who lived during that period through the medium of hand embroidery. Now, when I start one of these projects, my personality is such that I tend to get a little bit obsessive, and suddenly project takes over all of my life. So I suddenly noticed that the cardigan that I'm now wearing, it's off the needles, it's blocked, it's sewn up, is a 1950s pattern that I adapted slightly for my increased width. The socks, which I'm just about to finish, these were my train knitting from the weekend, are 1920s pattern. And my kind of leisure reading has been all of these amazing old magazines and books and so on. So last weekend I was going down to London to visit my daughters who are in their 20s and who both live in London, and that was sort of the point of the trip. But I noticed that at Dulwich Picture Gallery there was an exhibition of the work of Tirzah Garwood. Now, Tirzah was married to the watercolourist Eric Ravilious, who is much better known. And this exhibition was seen as her coming out of his shadow as an amazing artist in her own right. So I went along to see it. And all of the rest of this video is going to be talking about that and showing you some of the artworks in that exhibition, which is amazing and is on till May. So if you're in London and you can get to the Dulwich Picture Gallery, I would really recommend it. So Tirzah Garwood was born in 1908. So she's kind of in that tranche of women who were going to be the first women to get the vote when they were 21. And, to vote in this 1929 election that was known as the Flapper election, because suddenly these young women got to vote. So she's sort of like in this women becoming much more visibly independent. She went to art school, and there she met Eric Ravilious, who's one of the teachers, and she learned how to do wood engraving. And that's what she thought she was going to specialise in. She was an amazing and very humorous wood engraver, and she was producing, by the time that she was sort of like in her 20s, she was producing illustrations and things for calendars and books and kinds of things of this very funny, very, very well observed wood engravings. Now, wood engraving is a really painstaking technique. It takes a long time. It's very precise, and to handle it with lightness and humour and details that Tirzah Garwood does is quite astonishing. So by the time you come to sort of like a few years later, Tirzah and Eric were married, and they decided that they would move with friends, the Bawdens, out to Essex, and that they would rent houses, and they would kind of become a little bit of an artists' community. So they would have friends to stay at the weekends, and it was called Great Barfield. And for the next 10 years, I suppose, this sort of like a series of houses that they rented and bought and things became the heart of an artistic community. And at this point, Tirzah gives up on her wood engraving. She does the backgrounds of her husband's wood engravings, no credit. She helps him with murals, various sort of commercial premises. She gets no credit. And she spends her time complaining in her diaries and letters about people not helping with the housework. So basically what was happening was that when she was in her sort of like late 20s, early 30s, when she should have been at the height of her artistic production, she had friends and acquaintances and fellow artists all coming at the weekends or for weeks at a time to stay with them in the countryside, and everybody would go off, she'd wave them off to go and paint, draw, make preparatory sketches for their woodcuts, and she would be there making up beds, cleaning, sorting out food. She could drive. She was one of the few people who could drive in her circle of friends. So she would be taking people to the doctors, picking up things from the local village. She got no art done at all. And I think that this is something that is underreported a lot when you get these very romantic sounding artists' communities. So something like Charleston, or the Morrises. I suspect Carl Larsson as well in Sweden, that you get couples, friends all coming together having a lovely time. But the women of the sort of hosting household, even if they have servants, as Vanessa Bell had at Charleston, they are still tied up in the day-to-day hosting, the creating, the ambience, the welcoming people in. And that takes a lot of time, and it takes away a lot of creativity from women. So the first room in the Tirzah Garwood exhibition is her work before she went into the marriage and children and hosting and sorting out meals and all of that kind of thing. And it shows what an amazing woodcut artist she was. Then the rest of the exhibition is all about her absolute drive to express herself while having a lot of her time taken up by family, friends, keeping house. And I think that this is so fascinating because it shows that she was so much an artist that she couldn't allow her creativity to be stoppered. It just came out in different directions. So the first direction that we see it coming out in is her embroideries. Now, Tirzah Garwood and Eric Ravilious, they were married. But Eric had a series of affairs from very early on in their marriage, and although in the friendship group there seems to have been a feeling that, you know, affairs were nothing and that it was just something that was accepted, it's clear that certainly to start with, Tirzah was very upset by this. And there are a few mentions in things that any time that she can get away from her household duties, she is spending on making her embroideries. Now, there are two embroideries in this exhibition. One, and both of them are related to woodcuts that she had done earlier. So one shows her yawning in her bedroom. Now, it's a slightly odd embroidery now because the stockingette that was the face in the embroidery has discoloured a little bit. So I think visually it works not brilliantly if you see the face. However, if I show you all of the details of the embroidery, you know, the slippers and the Kirby grips on the dressing table, and every single millimetre of this embroidery is a funny little detail in exactly the same way as the woodcuts are full of very funny observations on life. The second embroidery in the exhibition is of someone watering a garden. And again, this is related to some woodcuts that Tirzah had done earlier of vegetables growing in a garden. And here you can see how incredibly closely worked this embroidery is. The plume of water, the sort of being active, the having chores to do in the garden, the watering of the plants. And then it's just an abundance of squash and courgettes and runner beans. All of this, abundance and plenty in the embroidery. The second way that her creativity came out was actually spurred by something that was quite practical. They were running out of money. She needed a way of bringing in money, and a fellow artist who lived with them called Eric Bawden, so a friend of Eric Ravilious. Eric Bawden and his wife had a go at marbling paper. Eric Bawden had given it up. It's a really difficult technique and he just decided it wasn't for him. But Tirzah and Charlotte Bawden, decided to persevere, and they began to create these amazing marbled paper. Charlotte went back to her pottery and left Tirzah to start a business that was commercially producing sheets of marbled paper, which she sold in galleries, craft galleries in London, and to private patrons. And it was these marbled papers which kept the family afloat. But, and this is, I think, really, really important, Tirzah was really proud of these marbled papers as an artistic thing, as a technique that she had mastered, that she was continuing to improve on, and that nobody else could do. So it wasn't the kind of side job just to bring in money. It was definitely a new artistic technique, which is very like printmaking, which she had taken up. And it so dominated her life that when she went to stay with friends, she would take her tank with her so that she could print over the weekend and fulfill orders. Now, this marbling, the sophistication of her designs is extraordinary. And some of the designs are being put into the tank 2 or 3 times. So they would be first printed often as a ground colour, then flattened and dried, the tank prepared again with different coloured oils, again the paper brought in, floated over the water there, so the oil just attached itself to the paper print, and then she would build up different colours, and they are astounding, and I just found it incredibly inspiring to see these. So Tirzah continued making these marble papers, and up until 1941, where obviously Britain was at war and the demand for high-end furnishing papers was diminishing. Eric had also got a job. He was working as a war artist, and sadly in 1942, on a trip to Iceland, he was involved in a plane crash and died. So Tirzah was left with 3 small children. The body wasn't recovered, of Eric Ravilious, so she was also sort of like campaigning so that she could get her widow's pension, which took a number of years. And through the 1940s, her art changes. And rather than go back to woodcuts or mural painting, she started to make these little dioramas. Now, the dioramas are made within butterfly collecting cases. So they've got maybe about 3 inches of space between the glass and the back. And into this she puts little houses and shops, all minutely painted. And I can see how this kind of artwork, which you are building up a little bit at a time, you know, you're making your leaf prints for your trees, you're cutting them out, you're painting portraits and cutting them out, you're making the shop fronts, and they are something that you could do a little bit at a time, keep it all in the frame, dust free, easy to put away. You could do this while there's family life going on, while you are doing other things, to just keep bringing it out, working on it a little bit at a time. And as inspiration, I found these just astonishing, because they are full of little bits of fabric or watercolour, things cut from magazines, everything. Like there's leaf prints as trees. So obviously she has got leaves. She has made very basic prints from them. Then she's carefully cut out those prints, mounted them to be the trees in these dioramas. And they are just a joy. They are just amazing. And then 1949 into 50, Tirzah is diagnosed with cancer. And over the next year until her death, she spent a lot of time in bed in a nursing home. She described it as the happiest year of her life. And again, her art completely changes, and she is making small oil paintings. They are oil paintings that can be done when she is sitting in bed. They are slightly surreal. They play with scale and perspective. There is a kind of toy box come to life kind of thing around them. They are slightly disturbing, but also very joyful. So there are tulips blooming. She had been brought to her bed a box of tulips, and she painted them. She paints them as though they're growing, and she paints a child's doll with them, who's striding through these shoulder-high tulips. It is such an interesting collection of work, all done in a year, all the same kind of size, the same style, concentrated way of using creativity to keep herself going through what must have been a really, really painful time. And if you want to put Tirzah Garwood into kind of like a chronological time frame with other people, her dates are pretty much the same as Frida Kahlo's. And certainly in many of the themes, the surrealism, the playing with scale and biography and mediums and so on, there are similarities between these women's work. So I would really, really recommend that you go and see the exhibition if you can, because it is very good. There is also a catalogue. It's a nice catalogue. It's got illustrations of pretty much everything in it. And there is also this really interesting autobiography that Tirzah Garwood wrote. It's kind of like a memoir-y kind of thing. If you're interested in art of the period, it's very interesting and funny, and it gives you a glimpse into the quite ordinary parts of lots of people's lives. And this was published in, I think maybe 2012 by Persephone. You can pick up copies on the internet. They may still have it actually. Persephone Books may still have it. I'll put the link underneath this. So I really enjoyed the trip, because what I'm interested in is seeing these artists who have been overshadowed, who have been ignored by art history, and seeing their work in enough scope, enough breadth, with enough attention being given to it. I mean, it's beautifully hung. It's such a good show, really. For you to be able to see, oh yes, actually, they were very good, and this is how they lived their lives, and this is how creativity just sprang from them, no matter where they were in their lives. And I'm particularly interested in women artists, makers, writers, who were continuing to create no matter what life threw at them. Because often we have this kind of view of artists as being sort of outside life. And that's the way a lot of art history has been told. Whereas, of course, artists live lives. Their lives are not always easy, and they're not always exciting. You know, sometimes it is just pudding, bowls and bowls and bowls of peas for people who are coming for dinner. And that, I think, is so lovely to see, the power of creativity in a normal, everyday, interesting, confusing, tragic, exciting life. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next Friday. Bye-bye.